Do we need to stop at every
Hello,
half
hello
hour?
everyone. Welcome to our adventure. We are dialing in from the Great Basin National Park. We've got Ranger Cameron. Hey, Ranger Cameron. And we got Ranger Aviva. Hello, hello. And with us today, Ranger Cameron, Ranger Aviva, we've got third, fourth, and fifth grade kids around Wichita Public Schools. We've got about 10 different classrooms dialing in and joining us today. Students, if you have questions, I want you to put those into the Q&A. Teachers, you can collect those questions from students and type them in there. I'll be watching, and so will Kristen. We're going to be monitoring the chat while our Rangers here take it over. So we're going to hand it over to you, Ranger Aviva, and let you take off.
Okay, great. And I'm just gonna, I believe I'm sharing my
Yes,
screen. So,
you look
great. You
great.
guys can see that?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so sorry we're a little bit late, but really excited to take you on this virtual tour of Great Basin National Park and the caves and the cave creatures that live in our park. So just a quick beginning here. National parks, I hope you guys have been to a national park. And if you want, you can throw into your chat if you've been to one, where you've been. We hope that you can visit many national parks in your life. And national parks preserve and protect a lot of incredible things like vegetation and beautiful scenery and wildlife and cultural history. So, Great Basin National Park is located in Nevada. So, we're in the western part of the United States where you can see that orange starred, dot over there. And we're very much not in Las Vegas. We're in a place where it's really rural and remote, and there's very little around us besides just nature. So, I'm gonna, whoops.
The Great Basin, where steep mountains rise.
Sorry, I'm going to show you a quick introduction to our park here. It's 30-second film. And while we do this, I want you guys to take a look at what the Great Basin looks like. Try to really kind of think to yourself, what would you want to see if you came to this park? What are you interested to learn more about? Okay, here we go.
The Great Basin, where steep mountains rise up from broad valleys and ancient trees cling to life through summer storms and winter snows. A place of breathtaking caves and glittering night skies. A high desert landscape of dramatic vistas and surprising gifts. Untold treasures await your discovery at Great Basin National Park.
So I don't know if you guys want to put in the chat some of the things that you noticed that you would want to learn more about, or the things that you'd want to see if you came to the park. And I'll let that, it doesn't seem like I can see the chat. So if things come into the chat, feel free to bring them up, the other folks that are helping with this presentation.
Yes. We
What?
we don't have any questions yet, but I'm sure that their wheels are discussing in the classroom. So we'll let you know if they
Okay.
The
pop in.
Great Basin.
Okay, sounds good. So, a really quick introduction to the park in general. We have these amazing dark skies at Great Basin National Park because we don't have light pollution, because we don't have city lights nearby. You can see the Milky Way here, and it's really something special. We also have these trees called the Great Basin bristlecone pine trees, which are some of the oldest, well, they are the oldest living organism on planet Earth that comes from a single seed. And these trees can live to be over 5,000 years old. We have a lot of different habitats in our park, from high mountains down to the floor where it is the valley below where it's desert, a lot of different vegetation, which means that we have a lot of different animal life that can live here as well. And what we're going to focus on today is we have a bunch of caves. We have more than 40 caves in our park, and Lehman Caves is the cave pictured here that you can go into with a ranger. So let's think about what kind of creatures could live in a cave environment. So the first question is, what does an organism need to survive? But first we have to understand, what is an organism? So if anybody knows what an organism is, you could put that into the chat. We can see if anybody knows how you would define an organism for somebody that doesn't know what that word means.
And while they're typing, we did get a couple of questions of curiosities. Our friends over at Earhart, they want to know how much snow do you get? So you might want to keep that in the back of your mind. And they want to know if you can see the northern lights from the Great Basin.
Ooh, those are great questions. And while people are trying to think about what an organism is, I'll answer those. So the snow is really different at different elevations in the park, meaning like at the tall mountains, we get a lot more snow than down lower on the valley floor. And also it changes a lot year by year, but usually maybe about 8 to 6 to 10 feet in the higher parts of the park, way up high. And as far as seeing the northern lights, we're not that far north, so that would be really rare to see those from Great Basin. So did anyone suggest what the definition is of an organism?
Not yet, but I have a
Okay.
feeling that they're guessing that it may be the same of what humans need: shelter and water.
Yeah. Yeah. So an organism is just a living thing. So an organism could be a plant, it could be an animal, it could be a bacteria, it could be, all these, anything that's a living thing is an organism. And the things that a living thing needs to survive, you probably have talked about in class, but you need, simple things like food and water. Most organisms need sunlight, air, shelter, kind of like a regular temperature. So when we look at our cave environment, I want you to really look hard at these pictures and think about what is in these pictures in our cave that are necessary for a creature's or an organism's survival. One thing you can see on the left is we definitely have some water. So that we have, and that helps. But when you look on that right picture, it all looks like rock and stone. There really isn't, you don't see any plants, you don't see any sunlight. That's just from the flash from the photographer. Um, and it's cold, and that's okay because animals can adjust to the cold. But how do they survive when there really isn't much food? The other thing I want you to look at in this picture is to consider all the light that you're seeing is created by the photographer that wanted to capture this really cool picture. Um, but in the regular environment in the cave, the cave is almost pitch dark, except for the little area that's by the entrance of the cave. It's going to be completely dark. So when we think about what animals are living in the cave and how they've adapted to live in this cave environment, that's really an important clue that there isn't a lot of food in here and it's very dark. But there is some water, so that's another clue that helps us think about what can survive in this cave environment. So animals have adaptations or they have special traits that help them survive in their habitat, which is the place that they live. And in the cave environment, we already talked about certain kind of things that make it unique and special, but also make it really a difficult place to live. So the creatures that live in our caves have to have a lot of really special adaptations so that they can survive in this unique and also challenging environment. Here is a picture that helps you understand the different aspects of a cave. So in the section over here, where the cave entrance is, there's some sunlight coming in, and there's also this entrance and exit, which means that a creature could actually come in for part of its life and leave for part of its life. And I bet you guys could think of some cave creatures that do that. You can actually see them in this drawing. You can see them in that twilight zone. If anybody has a guess as to a creature that comes in and out of the cave, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll just keep talking while you're doing that. But in our caves, this dark zone, which is completely dark, there's no light at all, is actually the majority of our cave. So maybe about 95% of our cave is completely dark. And the part where there's the entrance area and a little bit of light is only just a small portion of the cave. Did anyone guess what kind of creature could maybe fly in and out of a cave?
I think they're thinking bats.
That's what I was hoping they would think. Yeah. So bats. Bats are cave creatures. We often think about bats as living in caves, but the truth is that a bat needs to be able to leave that cave in order to survive, because a bat is leaving the cave in order to eat um, all of its food. They don't actually get any food at all within the cave environment. All of the food is outside the cave. So if they were in the cave and you had some kind of natural, like an earthquake or something that closed the entrance to the cave because there was a rock fall, the bats wouldn't survive. So they are animals that use the caves, but they have to leave the cave. Whereas these other guys, well, the spider also, he needs to be able to come in and out. These little guys are creatures that live entirely in our cave system. So we have different words for these different creatures that live in our cave. Troglo means cave. It's a Greek word for cave. Now our troglozine, they come in and out of the cave, and they can't survive if they're only in the cave. But the troglophile and the troglobite, those guys can live their entire lives in the dark part of that cave. So let's talk about some adaptations that these different animals have, these different creatures have that live in the different parts of our cave. So some of you may know that bats use something called echolocation so that they can be able to basically sense their world without using their eyes. If you've heard the term blind as a bat, actually our bats aren't blind at all. They can see. You can see on this little guy, he's got these cute little eyes right there and these big, big ears. So the ears are an example of part of that physical adaptation that allows them to use echolocation. So echolocation is a very, very high-pitched noise that the bat creates, and it goes out as a sound wave. And if you've ever, done your own echo when you've been in a place where you can yell echo and you can hear it come back to you, this is what the bat's able to do all the time, but with such a high-pitched noise that we can't hear it as humans. And it bounces off the world around it so that they can get actually a perfect picture of the world that they're in, and they can see just fine. What we as humans always think about seeing with our eyes, but really seeing is kind of like a sensing the world around you, being able to have a map and understanding the world around you. And other animals do this in other ways. It doesn't have to be with your eyes. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you a little video that's going to show you how this echolocation works. And what the person did with this video is they took the chirp, the real chirp from the echolocation, but they put it into a sound that we can hear. So you could see on that the bat was using the echolocation to find the moth to eat it. But wasn't it fun that it used the wing and the tail as well to stick that moth into its mouth? Um, So let's go deeper into our cave. Let's look at some of these other creatures. So this spider over here, it might be something that also comes kind of in and out of the cave. It's living a little bit more in the cave entrance zone. But all of these guys over here, they are living their entire lives in the cave. And I want you to look at them and to notice what's similar about them. So especially these three, um, look at the color. What do you notice that's very similar between these little cave creatures? And the other thing I want to tell you is that these pictures, these four pictures, they've really been magnified a lot. So these creatures are all very small, and we just made them larger so you can see them better. But when you look at these, I'm sure you're noticing something about the color that's very similar. I don't know if anyone wants to put that in the chat, what you notice.
They're thinking and having chats in the classroom. We'll have an answer shortly.
Okay, awesome. In meantime, while you're thinking about that, I'll give you an idea of how big these are. They're so small that they're kind of like the size of a pinhead or maybe just a little bit bigger. But very small. Like this one here is the size of dandruff. That's how small these little guys are.
We're noticing they all have legs.
Yeah, that is a great observation. So if you were in an environment that was completely dark, you have to use other senses in order to be able to navigate your environment, to be able to get around and find your food and do the things you need to do to survive. So, one of the ways you might do that is through touch. And so, legs could be an important part of how you're adapted to the totally dark environment. What are people noticing about the color?
This is Dunn's class from Kelly Elementary, the third graders. They're saying that they're all sort of a white color.
Yeah, exactly. So not only are they a white color, but they're almost colorless. Like this guy and this guy, basically they don't have any, and I think this one too, like they don't have any color at all. And so that's another thing that's an adaptation of this environment because really none of these animals, that creatures that live in the caves in the dark part that are living there all the time, none of them are using eyes to help them survive. In fact, this little guy doesn't have eyes. It actually has no eyes because they're just not necessary. The other thing that's not necessary if nobody's using their eyes is to make any color because the animals that we see in our world all the time, they have color for a certain reason. Maybe they have it for camouflage. Maybe they have it to warn, as a warning sign. Like some animals have a striking red color or a yellow color because it's a warning. And they're saying, hey, don't eat me. I'm poisonous. Um, but these little animals, nobody can see them and they can't see each other. And so what they do is they save energy by not producing any color or what we call pigment. Now, the other thing about all these little guys I mentioned before is that they're so small. Can anyone think of why the cave creatures would be really, really, really small? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to go on to the next. Well, let me see. Yeah, I'll stay here for the moment. So why would all of these like to be so small that it helps them survive? And think back to those things that organisms need to survive in a habitat. And what's a really important one? I don't know what you all had for breakfast and lunch today, but maybe you're feeling already a little hungry for a snack. So that's giving you a little bit of a hint there. What's the thing that might be really limited in a dark cave environment?
Well, we've heard from our third grade friends, Miss Heckman's class, that they don't won't be eaten. Being small is a good way to survive.
That is such a great answer because you guys got it exactly right. Being small is an excellent way to survive in a place where there's very little food. So there is food in the cave, but there's very little food in the cave. And that's why all the cave creatures are very little. They're very tiny. So this little guy here that we made really big so that you can see it, it just swims around in these little pools of water in the cave. Like I said before, it doesn't even have eyes, and it's just kind of eating little bacteria in the water or other kind of little tiny little bits of stuff in the water that might come in, nutrition that comes in when the water is coming through the cave because it's coming um, from the soil above. It comes in through the rock, through the cave, so it brings a little bit of nutrition in with it, but it's so small. Now, this guy, it's the Great Basin Cave pseudoscorpion. It is the biggest predator that we have in our cave system amongst those creatures that spent all of their lives in the cave. And if you all take your thumb and look at your thumbnail, this little guy is smaller than your thumbnail. And it is the biggest predator in our cave. And so that helps you understand how tiny everything is in this cave. I'm going to show you a tiny bit of a film that will go a little bit more into kind of the details and also show you the real images of the cave and some more creatures that we've talked about. We'll kind of go over that stuff and add a little bit more information.
All year round, even when the lights are turned out, springtails make up some of these cave animals. They are tiny, about the size of a piece of dandruff. There are at least 8 species of springtails that live in Lehman caves, and they are the most abundant invertebrate. If your ancestors lived in the dark for millennia, would they need eyes? Probably not. And the tiny snake range millipede, Nevidesmus ophimontis, doesn't have eyes either. This millipede is very white, as it no longer needs pigment to protect it from the sun. Millipedes are detrivores, eating detritus like old decaying woods and plants. Flies and beetles also live in the cave, although many of them don't live their entire lives in the cave. Nevertheless, if you look carefully, you can find dead flies along some of the cave walls, and in some places, their bodies have become part of the speleothems. The top invertebrate predator in the cave is the Great Basin Cave pseudoscorpion, Microcreagris grandis. Pseudo means false, and this pseudoscorpion, or false scorpion, does not have a tail stinger like true scorpions. Pseudoscorpions catch their prey with large claws called pedipalps. They take the prey to their mouth, then regurgitate digestive enzymes from their mouth into the prey's tissues to dissolve their insides into a broth they can slurp up. The pseudoscorpion was first noticed in the cave in 1930, but it wasn't identified until the 1960s, when Dr. William Muchmore found it was a new species to science. It has since been found in other caves in the Snake Range, but nowhere else on Earth, making it an endemic species. Every 3 months, park staff study the cave life by putting out a tiny bit of rancid peanut butter on some flagging tape, and then returning 24 hours later to see what creatures have been attracted to the putrid smell. This biomonitoring effort has been conducted for over a decade and is still ongoing. Caves are often homes to endemic species as they have specialized habitats. Changes to those habitats can mean that the species that live in them have nowhere else to live. Protecting cave creatures is another good reason to take care of caves.
So I know that there was a lot of kind of really scientific words in that video, but there's also such good information in there. That's why I wanted to share it. You can see really well what the caves look like and also what those tiny cave creatures are like. And I'm just going to end here with just one last little note on what an endemic species is. So an endemic species means that it's a organism or it's a life form that's only found on one place on the whole planet. That's it. It's just in this one place. We have more than 10 endemic species in our caves. So when you have these really unique habitats, animals over time have all these cool adaptations that they develop as long as they're in that habitat for, lots and lots and lots of time. And then they can develop differently than creatures that are somewhere else. And so they're unique to that one ecosystem or that one habitat. And we have these guys are just some examples of these endemic species here at our park at Great Basin National Park. And we do a lot of things to make sure that we keep these caves protected because any change to the cave system would make it so that habitat is changed and then they wouldn't be as well adapted and they couldn't survive as well. And so we want to be able to make sure that we're protecting these caves and protecting everything that's in Great Basin National Park so that it can live for its life the way that it's been adapted to. So I know that we're a little bit over time, but if we're able to do any questions, I would love to do that.
We would love your questions. Teachers, if you've got student questions, go ahead and put those in the chat, and then we will share those here with our rangers today. And I have a feeling that your students were just already talking and buzzing about the information that we saw here today. So excited to see what they have. Kristen, what is one question you are wondering?
Well, I was curious because when I think of caves, I always think of bears. So are there any bears in your national park that might stumble upon one of your caves?
We don't actually have bears in Great Basin National Park. There was bears in pretty much all of the United States at one point, but they were hunted and they're not in the basin and range in the Great Basin National Park area anymore. But we have some cool history of wildlife using the caves, but it's mostly in a fossilized form from like the Ice Age time. There was big mammoths that were in our caves, and we found some bones and some other fossils from those.
The other thing, because there's kind of a delay, so we'll give them a few more seconds, is when I think of caves, I always think of those structures from the ceiling down and from the floor up.
Yeah.
And do you want to maybe touch on those and what those are called?
Yeah, we didn't have too much time, so I didn't get into our cave decorations, but we call those, there's all these fun words you can learn. So a speleothem is a cave decoration, but I like to think of the stalactites as they hold tight to the ceiling. So a stalactite is holding tight, a stalagmite is on the bottom, and what we call a column is where a stalactite and a stalactite meet. Or I like to call them a tighty mighty.
We're getting a lot of questions coming in. Let's start with our friends over in Miss Warren's class at College Hill. They want to know, how many species of bats are there in your caves?
I'm going to turn that over to Cameron. She's also available for us today. So you answer that,
We have
Cameron.
9 species of bats that utilize the caves within Great Basin National Park. The most common ones that you're going to see are the ones we talked about today, those Townsend's big-eared bats.
Very nice. Okay. And we're going to pop over to the 4th grade at Irving Elementary, and they want to know, what do bats do if a predator tries to get them?
It's a good question. So certain animals really have adaptations that are so excellent for them that they don't have a lot of predators. The way that bats fly, if you've ever noticed a bat flies kind of erratically, it's just like flip, 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 like it's kind of like going all over the place. That right there is already an adaptation that will help. It makes it so it's harder for a predator to capture it. So I think probably it's mostly going to be like a young bat who isn't as good at flying or an older bat who might be in its old age that could possibly get eaten by a predator. But mostly the bats that are adults are they're gonna not have too much predation.
Okay, and then Mr. Millspaugh's class, we've got two questions from there. They're at Dodge Elementary. These are fourth grade students. They want to know, how do the animals survive the cold at inside the cave? And the second question is, do bats use their echolocation skills outside of the caves?
Well, Cameron, you want to answer those ones?
Yeah, so because the caves are underground, they're very stable with the temperature. So all year long, they stay right about 52 degrees. So those animals only have to adapt to one temperature and then they stay comfortable all year long. Um, and the bats are going to use their echolocation in and out of the caves. In the caves, it's going to be important because it's kind of a tight space, so they need to know exactly where they are. But they use a lot outside of the cave to find their food and to make sure they're not flying into other bats or into trees. So that echolocation really helps them everywhere they are.
And then we do have several students here who are fourth grade who are studying the regions of the US. What makes Great Basin a cool, great place for students to come visit? What makes it special that they definitely need to know is something they should see in the future?
Yeah, I think on this one, I think both myself and Cameron should answer this. Um, we started by giving you a really quick overview of some of the cool things in the park. So if you're able to come visit the park, you could go to an astronomy program with rangers and look through telescopes and see those amazing dark skies. You could go on a cave tour with rangers. It's a great place to camp and go for hikes. You can go visit those oldest trees, the Great Basin bristlecone pine tree. I like to touch them and think about, wow, this has been here for thousands of years and just kind of absorb that. But I'm going to turn it over to Cameron for like the kind of the description of, so that was just kind of my personal likes, but the description of kind of how we define the Great Basin so that from a regional point of view, you can understand how we define the Great Basin region.
There are going to be a couple of different ways to define it. One of the ways being by elevation. And we touched briefly, I think, on how drastically different the levels of elevation are within the park. There's about a 7,000-foot change in elevation. So we have so many different types of ecosystems within that range. We have the deserts lower down in the valleys. We have the super high elevations on top of the mountains where we have way fewer animals that can stay up there. Being in the Great Basin is just this amazing opportunity to see so many different types of wildlife, of plants, of different environments all in one place. We also define it by the fact that all of our water stays in Great Basin. Normally, all water systems will eventually reach the ocean in North America. So it's super unique the way that our water works. It returns to groundwater, and that's how we formed all of our caves. So everything that you see here really ties into how another ecosystem is formed or how it's maintained. And it's just a fabulous example of diversity in one area.
Excellent. And we have time for just a couple more quick questions. One of them is from Miss Cunningham's class over at Earhart Elementary. And it ties in with another fourth grade class over at Irving that's also asking. But one is, when were bats first discovered in the cave? And I know that's going to be a tough one to answer, but maybe it's more of, when were bats starting to be studied in science? That may be a better way to go with that one. And then they want to know, are there any rare kind of bats that can be found in the cave?
Well, I'll answer a little bit of what I know, and then we'll see if Cameron knows anything else. I don't know exactly when bats were discovered. I think these caves were used by Native Americans. So I think there probably have been bats in the caves, as long as there have been humans around to notice them, there's probably been bats in these caves. Um, as far as studying them, so a couple of interesting things. One is that cave that we take people into, Lehman Caves, there was a point when, before the park was a park, when, over 100 years ago, when Lehman was giving tours of this area, he had built a structure over the natural entrance to the cave, and it actually kept the bats out. He didn't probably realize that that was a problem. And so the park realized that was a problem. I mean, the structure has been gone for a while, but the park built what we call a cupola, a natural entrance to the cave. And once the park did that, it took about 20 years for the bats to really come back in their numbers of having a lot of bats in there and having a population of breeding bats where they're having babies. So who doesn't love baby bats? So we're excited for that. Do you have anything to add, Cameron, or did I pretty much?
I think you got all except, so because we have 9 different species, some of them kind of stay here year round and some of them migrate. So I'd say that the ones that are most uncommon are going to be the ones that migrate in from Mexico only during the summer to have their maternity time and have their puppies. But other than that, we see a lot. And we're actually doing a study right now where we put out some really cool things called bat detectors, where all these different species have a different pitch to their chirps. And so it records those different sounds and will tell us how many of different species of bats have flown through that area. So that'll be some really interesting research to be able to use in later talks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. And fourth grade, we hope to see you on another adventure later today. Uh, Rangers, we're going to go to Hawaii Volcano National Park later today. So we're kind of touring around the United States and looking at so many of our national parks. But it was awesome to start with both of you today. Thank you so much.
You
Thank
guys.
you. So great to see you all. Well, not see you, but to be with you all. Bye.
Bye, guys.